Great, thanks everyone for coming back from lunch and coming to this presentation. Just a quick side announcement. Just before lunch I got up, I was sitting over there, I lost my cell phone. If anyone's picked up a BlackBerry torch, if you wouldn't mind passing it on, I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, this work was done in collaboration with some associates from KwaZulu-Natal Environmental Services, and also in collaboration with a group of folk from KZN Wildlife. So I want to acknowledge those guys. Jean Harris, first of all, for giving us permission to collaborate. Debbie Jewett, Steve McQueen, Joe Padima, Clint Eastwood, Beg Egnere when he was still with KZN Wildlife, he's with Etegweni now, and Roger Davis from KwaZulu-Natal Environmental Services. That was a group of folk that sat around a template, which I'll show you now, and allocated values of ecosystem services to land cover. But I'm jumping the gun, but just to give acknowledgement to those folk up front. So what I'm going to try and tell you this afternoon is tell you what the context of this work was, what this work set out to achieve, how we went about doing this, where to from here with this work. Is it a dead end or has it got a bit of a future? And then some lessons that we've learned in the form of some concluding remarks. Get rid of this. I lifted the slide out of a presentation that was done by Piet de Plooy from Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies, which shows quite nicely the relationship between the three capitals, natural, social and economic, and basically how the economic capital is drawing very heavily on natural capital, and social capital is drawing very heavily on it as well, with very few returns, which means that we're overdrawing on our natural capital, with consequences, the economy becoming destabilized by influences such as greenhouse gases or pollution, both water quality, air quality, etc. Nature is becoming destabilized by the economy, climate change we all know about. So quite a nice depiction of the relationship between those capitals, with the fulcrum being governance, necessary to try and manage those capitals. So essentially the thrust of this work was recognizing there was an opportunity. The province was asking for a spatial economic development strategy. More specifically, they were asking for insights into what the economic drivers were within the province. So the tender opportunity popped up. I passed the opportunity on to some associates and I said, if you include the value of natural capital in your bid for this work, it might give you a competitive edge. Now I'm not sure if that was why they won the tender, but they did, and I was asked to come along and help understand what the value of natural capital was to the province, which hopefully influences the governance aspect, because Jean recognized the value of this work in terms of taking KZN Wildlife's work around ecosystem goods and services into the realm of spatial economic planning for the province. So that's the relevance of that illustration. You've seen this, it's quite a well-known illustration of where we're at in terms of our planetary boundaries, and the fact that climate change is an issue. We've gone beyond that boundary, but more importantly, biodiversity loss is exceeded that planetary boundary quite significantly. And from a species conservation perspective, obviously huge concern there, but from an ecosystem perspective, what are some of those consequences? Now, I'm not saying that the biodiversity loss is a direct consequence in terms of the increased incidence of flooding events around the world, but it could be. There could be quite a strong linkage between those two. But in any case, the indications are there that the number of floods per decade is increasing quite significantly in many countries and continents around the world. This picture I lifted off the Witness website yesterday morning. This is a picture of the donga that emerged in the road between Grahamstown and Port Elizabeth the day before yesterday. I'm not exactly sure what caused that donga. They say a truck drove into a pothole. That's what the newspaper said. I suspect that there was some failure of ecological infrastructure here that exacerbated that and caused that massive wash away. However, what are the consequences of that? The economic consequences. You know, going into this study of the value of natural capital to the economy of the province, there are some very clear associations between economic activities and natural capital, but there are some where the association is less clear. What does that mean to a career service who now has to drive via Port Alfred to Port Elizabeth? There's a huge economic ramification for that service sector, which doesn't have a direct link to nature and natural capital. But what I'm trying to illustrate here is that if you step back and try and make those linkages between the economic drivers within a province, whatever your planning scale is, your planning unit is, I'm sure you're going to find important linkages. A little bit closer to home, this picture I took last week, Kobus Taron featuring there to provide some scale. But this is the R56 from Matatiele towards Maclear, and that's the edge of an engineered stormwater drain draining the R56 into the natural veld. And you can see what the floodwaters have done to those gabions. They've treated them with great disrespect, and there's been some serious consequences to that engineering infrastructure. So we need to think very carefully about how we go about managing our natural environment and what those economic impacts are. So the question, as I asked there is, can we afford business as usual, or is it time for a different approach? And I'm hoping that through the work that we've done in this economic development strategy, that we're introducing the need for a wake-up. Business as usual is not working. It has serious ramifications. And we do need to start thinking about things a lot more sustainably. Some of you might have seen this picture already. It's been used quite widely. It's one I took in May last year. It's just near the town of Mount Fletcher in the Upper Umzimvubu catchment on the Tina River. And it's a dam that was built, completed in 2008 and photographed in May 2011, which has now lost 70% of its water holding capacity due to sedimentation. So the full risk assessment was not done. The dam is now pretty much, well, it's good for sand mining, but not really for storing water. The water treatment plant was incomplete at the time that this photograph was taken. The reticulation infrastructure is not yet in. 70% of the holding capacity is gone. So business as usual, we don't have room for business as usual anymore. Fortunately, there seems to be some good thinking coming through. The National Strategy for Sustainable Development is portraying those three capitals differently, and I believe very appropriately, indicating that our natural capital, expressed there in the terms of ecosystem services, needs to be the foundation upon which societal well-being is based and which economic resilience is based. But if we continue with the business as usual approach, we are going to increasingly come across the term vulnerability. Society and the economy is extremely vulnerable. There's that illustration of the pothole in the road between Grahamstown and PE. There's a huge amount of vulnerability, and there are significant consequences associated with it. And what we're hoping to achieve through this work is that we'll move that term vulnerability and reintroduce the terms well-being and resilience. So societal well-being and economic resilience. So if you think of those three capitals and their balances and how one's been overdrawn, if we overdraw on that natural capital, societal well-being will be compromised and economic resilience will be compromised. So it's absolutely relevant from an economic planning perspective. This is probably a term that you're quite used to now. We had a lot of it yesterday. We've had quite a bit of it this morning already. But the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment defines ecosystem services as the benefits that people obtain from ecosystems. Fairly straightforward. What we wanted to do in this work was we wanted to provide a broader picture than that. One that would provide the basis for full cost accounting. and an understanding of benefits, of opportunities, of risks, of consequences, constraints to economic drivers within the province. And the way that we did this, it was quite a simple exercise, is that we interrogated the KZN land cover types. It was the 2008 land cover types. There's Debbie here. Debbie. You can tell me what's the resolution of that 2008 land cover? 20 by 20. Thank you. Thank you. So that's quite a fine resolution. And when I say we, it was that team that I spoke of in the beginning. I provided the team with a matrix, but sorry, before we get there. So once again, another pretty picture that you're all quite used to seeing. So we used the land cover types. There are 47 land cover types covering the entire province of KZN. And we superimposed our thinking related to these 4 broad categories of ecosystem goods and services that have been put forward by the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, and I think have been generally well received and internalized by ecologists and the conservation fraternity. So we scored each land cover type on its ability to deliver goods and services, from a +3 to a -3, so relatively simple. +3 being optimum potential to deliver goods and services, right through to the -3 where you've completely lost your potential to deliver goods, and instead of delivering services, you're actually delivering disservices. Disservices that are having costs to society. So an area of sheet erosion has completely lost its ability for rainwater to infiltrate. It's producing sediments that are filling up dams, that are filling up river systems, etc. There are societal costs associated with that. The mining site, acid mine drainage, there are societal costs associated with those disservices. So from 3 to -3, and we illustrated those from a dark green, green, light green, white, yellow, orange, red. Reimposed those onto the land cover map so that you could actually see that spatially. But what we also then did was we applied a very simple weighting, because we realized that if they had equal weightings, the cultural considerations brought out the urban environment as being a lot more eco-friendly than it is. And so we downplayed the value of cultural considerations. So if you understand the city of Durban, with that massively transformed beachfront, has a huge tourism value. So if you apply those Millennium Ecosystem categories strictly, you've got to score that quite highly. So it was sort of skewing the picture from an ecosystem services perspective. And that's just an example of what the matrix looked like. So we listed the 47 land cover types, the 4 categories of ecosystem goods and services, and collectively we threw it around. So for each of those cells we had a discussion and deliberated around what is that particular land cover doing in terms of provisioning. And on the original spreadsheet, each one of those has got a comment that's captured the deliberation, so we can go back and understand what was the rationale behind the allocation of that score. And then, as I said, that was reflected spatially, and you can see on the left is the land cover map, and on the right is the ecosystem goods and service potential interpretation of that land cover. See the scale on the right hand side from +3 through to the -3 at the top. Sorry, we don't have time to look at specifics there. Just to give you an indication, these are the 11 district municipalities in KZN, and I've collapsed those 47 land cover types into 8 broad land cover types, and it's a bit fine to see probably from the floor, but you can see, for example, the Ngongonglovo district is where we are here. It's the district around Pietermaritzburg, includes a bit of the Berg up near Ngeni Vlei, but it's a big chunk of land and strategically very important because of the Ngeni River providing water to Durban, the eThekwini metro. And if you look at Ngongonglovo and you have a look at the natural component, the natural terrestrial, it's less than 50%. So the Ngongonglogo district municipality has lost more than 50% of its natural capital. More than 50% of its natural capital has been transformed to a lesser or a greater extent. It is also the district that has the greatest amount of agriculture. So almost 40% of agriculture within Ngongonglogo. And that's considered by some as soft transformation. It has the potential still to deliver goods and services if it's well managed. But then if you have a look at eThekwini Metro, the amount of natural capital gone is more than 40%. It's about 37, 36% natural capital left in eThekwini, and the amount of settlement is way over 40%. So the actual hard infrastructure that's in place in eThekwini is huge. And if we go back to the map, you can see eThekwini over here. And I'll zoom into that in a moment with all those negative scores. There's Ngongonglovo. A lot of sugar and timber over there. A lot of irrigation, agriculture in the Moy River area. Almost 20% scoring a more than -2. So the amount of disservices being delivered within Ngongonglogo, almost 20% of the surface area of Ngongonglogo has externalities, negative impacts on the environment, with just more than 50, maybe around 60% of the surface area that has retained some potential to deliver goods and services. And there's eThekwini with its urban footprint. Interestingly enough, to the north and the south of eThekwini it's a similar picture, but for different reasons. That's an urban footprint, and to the north and south it's an agricultural footprint. So you can see within that metro the huge loss of natural capital and the huge area generating externalities. So what we've further did with this work was we then focused in on each of the 11 districts and provided some commentary on the condition of the natural capital and the quality of the eco-services being delivered. I've crammed ecosystem goods and services into eco-services. Okay? Some comment on jargon in a moment, just so that we're on the same page. Commented on the ecosystem resource linkages between the districts. And that's very important to understand how those districts speak to each other and the trade-offs that are necessary between the districts. And then, importantly, resilience or vulnerability of the economic drivers. So within each of the districts, my colleagues on the project generated information on the most important economic drivers within those districts, and then I made the link between the condition of the natural capital and the vulnerabilities of those economic drivers, the opportunities or constraints to economic growth. Just to illustrate the link, that's the Spring Grove Dam under construction on the Moy River, which is going to be transferring water into the Umgeni. So it's coming out of the Ngongonglovo district. eThekwini Metro is hugely dependent on that natural resource base and the ability for that catchment to deliver good services into that impoundment. So where to from here? So we've done the economic drivers study, which is going to feed into the provincial spatial economic development strategy, and I've been told that is going to feed into the provincial growth and development strategy, and there's a possibility that we might be called on to help with further interpretation of this work. Some concluding comments quickly is that the way that this concept of natural capital, the concept of ecosystem goods and services, the way that it is packaged can make quite a difference. In a recent study done by the Nature Conservancy, out of 16 terms that are used to describe the benefits of nature, the terms ecosystem services was ranked 13th, and the term natural capital was ranked 15th. The term that they liked the most was nature's value, interestingly enough. Okay, so packaging, the language that you use is very important, but perhaps it depends on the audience. These are just some suggestions off the top of my head. Perhaps you guys understand what I'm talking about when I talk about ecosystem goods and services. Question mark? Do you? Okay. Ecological infrastructure. I know that Sanby has been talking to Treasury, and apparently that term has found traction there. Water resource planners understand it. In terms of natural capital, perhaps the economists will understand it. Natural life support systems. Local government planners might understand it. General public might understand it. Lastly, we need to find ways to better map nature's values. And that will assist us to better understand the linkages between the source of the goods and services, the pathway that it flows, and who's receiving them. It will also help us to clearly spatially represent this as a communication tool to role players and stakeholders. It will improve our ability to make recommendations in terms of where best to invest our limited resources.